Hello, hello, and welcome to another episode of Inner Work for Greater Good. My name is Emily Eldridge. I am the founder of ChangeLight, Inner Work for Greater Good, and the creator of the ChangeLight system. I teach changemakers how to do inner work that accelerates their power to change the world. And this is work that came out of my own experiences as a changemaker, as someone who was driven to make a positive difference in the world. And yet at the same time, I always felt so blocked and so insecure. And I had all these different triggers and all these inner emotional turmoil and issues that really kept me from stepping into my power as a change maker and doing what I know I came here to do. And even sometimes even trying to figure out what that was, what is it that I'm here to do? Who am I here to be? But just knowing nevertheless that I'm here to make a difference, and yet feeling blocked and triggered and all of that. So the point is, what I share in this show is the work that I discovered, the discoveries that I made, the techniques that I've created that actually have freed me of my own inner struggles and turmoils and brought forward my true powers. And so that's what I love to share with you in my show here. In case this is the first time, welcome. I'm so happy to have you here. If you've been here before, great. We're going to keep trucking along with this wonderful series that I'm doing. So just so you know, I have here's my website. I always like to show my website because I like, it's a little bit different when you sort of say, oh, well, that's the person's, TV show or what have you. But no, we actually have a website. I've got a whole setup there so that you can, after the show, check it out, look at what's available. I've got a course, the ChangeLight system course, and it's inside of a wonderful community, which I've just launched. I'm very excited. This is December 2021. So I just launched it. Very, very excited about that, where change makers can do their inner work that accelerates their power to change the world in a very safe and supportive space. Because as you see, whether this is your first time watching me or not, you see that we talk about some pretty intense things that as you start to really look inside and start to pay attention to what's going on and then do that inner work, stuff comes up. And that stuff can be really painful. It can be really, really hard to deal with. And so that's why I've got techniques, and I've got a lot of support in there, doing monthly regular Q&As and interviews with change makers and all kinds of fun stuff. I also have a VIP program, as you can see, in which I work privately with people who are passionate about making a difference. And I take them through the whole ChangeLight system, and we heal those inner struggles. When I talk about inner struggles, I can heal an inner critic in 2 or 3 hours. It's actually not that hard. And as you'll see, and if you watch the last episode, you'll see that I actually talked about what those inner critics usually are and what it is that, the impact they tend to have on us. Well, my technique, the drawing out process, permanently heals those things. So I'd like to reinforce that, because as I'm sharing this inner work and we're talking about these parts of the self that are really troublesome and really problematic, I want to reassure you that this stuff can heal. We aren't doomed to struggle with a lot of these things, and there are ways to do that. So anyway, VIP program, I do a lot of speaking. I've spoken all over the world, and I've been very honored to speak at the United Nations and British Parliament a couple of times. I've done a couple of TEDx talks too, spoken in China, Morocco, all over the world. So I'm really, really excited and honored to share on this platform as well, and to really help you recognize that perhaps you may not identify yourself as a change maker, but if you know that you want to make a difference, and if you know that you're driven to have a positive impact in the world, and you don't even necessarily know what that is, that's okay, because this is all part of the process. I'm going to share more about how you can actually do that, really start to know what your truth is and how to actualize it. Speaking of which, again, the ChangeLight, I say again if you've seen the show before, but basically these are sort of the basic elements of the ChangeLight system. This doesn't show the techniques necessarily, but it shows the discoveries that I've made through my own journey, through my work with other people around the world. And that basically what happens is that as we go through our life experiences, we end up with what I call exPowers, and that it's all about healing those exPowers. And as you heal those exPowers, those inner struggles, those blocks, triggers, blind spots, wounds, they actually transform into nPowers, which we'll talk about later in a later part of my show, another episode. And that ultimately you also have inside of you what I call your inner guiding star. And that's the vision of who you are here to be, doing what you came here to do. It's really that sort of like, almost like this like, it's one thing to know your truth, which is what this is really all about, is accessing your truth and actualizing it. But your guiding star is like that vision of you living your truth. And so there's some really cool ways to access that and work with your own guiding star so that your guiding star can guide you to live your truth and to feel fully whole and fully empowered. And as I often say, your truth is the treasure that we are after here. This is what it's all about. You already have your own inner compass inside of you. You already know who you are. You already know who you're here to be. So it's simply a matter of, clearing out all those exPowers, those inner struggles, and bringing forward those mPowers, those parts of you that know your truth and know what feels good and right for you, and tapping into your guiding star so that you can truly know and actualize your truth. And my process in the ChangeLight system actually has a 4-step process for actualizing your truth. So we're continuing in this series talking about exPowers. So exPowers, again, another reminder for those of you who've already seen the previous episodes. For those of you who are new, welcome. exPowers that's the term that I use for any part of you that feels like it gets in the way of you feeling fully at peace with yourself and inside yourself, safe in your own skin, and fully empowered. There are a lot of other terms for it. If you use the term blocks, triggers, blind spots, you may be familiar with Eckhart Tolle's work, and he talks about the pain body, or a lot of people talk about the ego and parts of the ego that get in the way and cause us to behave in certain ways. Well, basically, exPowers is the term I use to describe those parts of you, those aspects of your shadow. There's another term, right? The shadow part of the self, the shadow self. And so exPowers are those parts that are inside your shadow, that are parts of the ego, that are parts of your pain body that cause you to react in different ways, in ways that may not be so helpful, ways that may have protected you at one time, but don't necessarily protect you anymore. So as I define, exPowers are parts of you that are stuck in chronic states of stress, reactivity, or pain. They are your subconscious, unhealed wounds and defenses. So there you go, exPowers. And that's what we're talking about. Again, this is the third one in the series, talking about exPowers again. Now, if you've seen the previous 2 episodes, you'll see that I talked about defenders in the last episode, but the one before that. And in the last episode, I talked about controllers. This time, we're going to talk about woundeds. Before I jump into woundeds, let me just say that defenders and controllers are basically parts of us that are trying to protect us from pain. They are basically our defenses in one way or another. And they try to protect us from pain, from future pain, from potential pain in various different ways. Defenders have their ways of doing it, and controllers have their ways of doing it. So if you missed those previous 2 episodes, I highly, highly recommend that you watch those, because it also kind of sets us up for where we are now. And now we're going to talk about woundeds. So let's get into woundeds. I mean, look at these poor creatures. This poor little boy and girl, they're crying, they're sad. We're going to talk about what are inner woundeds, what are they trying to do, and why is it so important to heal them. Now, mind you, when it comes to exPowers, let me just say again and let you know that if you notice you have these parts of you, that's okay. Everyone does. Okay. So I hope that by learning this information, you realize that, and I'm not crazy. And also I'm not alone. And oh my gosh, I had that inside of me. And now this woman, Emily, has just demystified it for me. Now I understand a little bit better about these parts. That is what this is all about. Because as much as my work is about, the techniques that I do to heal these parts, it really is so much of it is based on understanding what these parts are about, why they exist, so that you can have a deeper compassion for these parts of you that maybe you've judged as weak or insecure or part of your flaws or something that's wrong with you, usually because somebody else judged or criticized you for things like, as we're about to get into, woundeds. All right, so what are woundeds exactly? Woundeds basically show up in a bunch of different ways, but typically they show up as feeling unwanted, unloved, rejected, ignored, forgotten, and abandoned. A lot of times when I work with a wounded, and in my work, the drawing out process, where I actually guide my clients to draw out that part of them that they can feel that they're struggling with, that's at the core of their inner struggle. And when a wounded shows up, a lot of times it is like a sad little boy or girl curled up in the corner, just like the little girl here, sitting in the corner and crying, or and sometimes even like in a windowless room. There are no windows, there are no doors. So they often feel trapped. They feel very alone. They feel like they've been banished to this place. So that's what a lot of wounded show up as. So unloved, unwanted, rejected, etc. They also often feel very scared, anxious, and confused. It's fascinating to me how many woundeds will say, I don't know why they treat me this way. I don't know why I'm stuck in this scary place. I don't know how I got here. So it's that very like innocent just cry of like, why are they so mean to me? What's going on? And I don't understand. And so that a lot of times they'll express that. Woundeds will express that because they've been mistreated. And as you can guess, it's because if you have these woundeds that are saying that and feeling that way, it's because you've been mistreated too. And parts of you are feeling that way. Why are they so mean to me? I'm not mean to them. Why are they hurting me? I've definitely had those woundeds inside of me too. Also, they often show up as sad, hopeless, trapped, and helpless. One of the defining characteristics of woundeds is that they tend to feel a sense of powerlessness. And that's where there's a difference between when you've got the defenders and the controllers and the woundeds. What's interesting about defenders and controllers, or what's different, I should say, is that they do have a sense of their own power. They have a sense that they can somehow protect or defend or control a situation or whatever they see as the source of the pain. Woundeds tend not to. They tend to feel like complete victims. They don't have any power. And even the ones that show up as seeming like they're having some power. So for example, I've had a lot of wounded show up in me and other people that I called your inner tantrumers. So they're throwing a temper tantrum, and maybe they're screaming, or maybe they're yelling at the person and they're saying, well, you're not doing this and you're not doing that. And so they're like tormenting the person. But ultimately what we find out when we start talking to that inner wounded is they're behaving that way because they feel so powerless, so out of control of their own circumstances, so unprotected, they have needs that they feel aren't being met. So ultimately underneath that behavior that they may have on the surface is really a sense of, I don't know how to, I don't have the power to change this. I don't know what to do. And what they're trying to do, we'll get into this, but what they are trying to do is get your attention so that you'll do that for them, whatever that is. Finally, or not finally, the second from the last, a lot of times they feel criticized, shamed, and misunderstood. Woundeds often form inside of us. And I've talked about this a little bit in previous episodes. All exPowers, I should say, form inside of us as a result of some experience, some kind of circumstance, something that caused us to feel in one way or another, on one level or another, that caused us to feel unsafe. Okay, so anything that caused us to feel unsafe, and that includes criticism. If you were criticized as a child, and I would say probably all of us were, unless you were like living, in the woods somewhere and you had this perfect parents and they never said anything mean to you or never made you feel like you weren't somehow good enough. All of us have experienced some kind of criticism. And what happens when we experience that criticism is that a part of us can form that carries the wounds, that carries that sense of, I am not okay as I am. I am not good enough as I am. And so then there's that sense of unsafety. I am not safe around these people. These people don't understand me. They don't accept me as I am. And so that's often when a wounded will form. And then finally, angry, believing that it's not fair. Oh boy, have I had so many woundeds. And we've heard little kids say this too. It's not fair. That's not fair. And a lot of times wounded show up like that. They're really pissed off. They're really like, how dare you treat me like this? So this is in a nutshell wounded. So if you have any parts of you like this You are not alone. We all have this inside of us. And it's so interesting how, depending on the circumstances, we might have that wounded reaction, but we might have a part of us that tries to suppress it because we think, well, I have to be an adult. So even people who you think on the outside are acting like adults have these woundeds inside of them. We're all just really good at hiding them. So, what is it that woundeds are trying to do? I talked in previous episodes about the fact that exPowers behave the way they do because, and I said with controllers and defenders, they're trying to protect you from pain, some kind of pain or another. They're trying to change your behavior so that you won't experience that again. Let's say get criticized again, which is often what a controller will do. Or they're trying to block whatever they see as the source of that pain, as a defender will tend to do. They're trying to defend you, whereas controllers are trying to control you or a part of you that's feeling that pain or trying to control other things. And that actually reminds me again, this is all about what's going on the inside. So these behaviors can show up on the outside, absolutely. But I just feel it's really important to recognize that, just because someone's acting like a controller on the outside doesn't necessarily mean that that's exactly what's going on the inside. And vice versa, just because someone's acting like a wounded on the outside, their biggest struggle may actually be a controller that's criticizing them and tearing them down and causing them to feel wounded. So I just want to establish that distinction. We're talking about what's happening on the inside. So in this case, woundeds are different from controllers and defenders. So controllers and defenders are trying to protect us from pain, whatever ways they know. Woundeds are different. Woundeds, for the most part, are trying to protect themselves. Okay, remember, they feel powerless. They also feel unprotected most of the time. They feel unsafe, remember? And so what woundeds are often doing, and the reason why they're behaving the ways that they're behaving, is because they're trying to protect themselves. So there are two sort of expressions of that when it comes to wounded. So a lot of woundeds are behaving the way they do because they're trying to get your attention. Remember, I described that tantrumer before. They're trying to get your attention so that you'll notice how terrible they feel, and so that you'll do something about it. You see? So that's where it's kind of interesting. You can have woundeds who are, sort of come across as very attacking and critical, and you might think that they're controllers, but really they're just trying to get your attention, whether it's screaming or crying or yelling at you or tearing you down. I've had plenty of woundeds who are, tearing that person down and saying, you don't care about me and you don't, and just making all these accusations. And oftentimes what happens, sadly, is that here this wounded is like trying desperately to get that person's attention because they need help, because sometimes they just simply want you to sit with them and just say, yeah, I can tell you're in a lot of pain. Yeah, I can tell you're hurting. I'm really, really sorry. I'm sorry that person did that to you, and empathize with that wounded. But unfortunately, sometimes the wounded, its attempts at trying to get your attention is causing you to feel criticized and hurt and manipulated, and you don't want to deal with that wounded. It hurts too much. It's too frustrating. You don't know what to do with its pain, and so you end up pushing it away, resisting it, even tearing it down, sticking in a box. I've had plenty of people whose woundeds, we ended up, I said I had them draw out whatever their struggle was. I'm thinking of one in particular that I'll share. This woman came to me because she'd been really struggled with a lot of self-criticism and feeling very depressed. And basically what she ended up drawing out in the drawing out process, the technique that I do to heal these exPowers completely, is she drew a box. She drew a box, and it was like, okay. So then we ended up opening the box, and inside was this little girl who was screaming and crying, and she was raging at this woman and screaming at her for not paying attention. And basically what had happened is the woman, my client, had put this little girl inside of a box years before because she didn't know what to do with the trauma that little girl was carrying, that part of her had been carrying. And as it turned out with this particular client, that little girl, that wounded little girl inside of her was carrying the wounds, the trauma, the terror of having been violated. I'll just say that she was physically violated when she was a little girl by one of her teachers. I'm sorry if that's triggering for anyone, but that's the reality. And so what ended up happening was we sat, and in the drawing out process, I actually talked to the part and that exPower and find out what the story is. And it took a while before the little girl finally told, because she'd been shamed into staying silent. But ended up talking to the little girl. She shared the story. She came out of the box. She was so much happier, took her through the rest of the process, and she was completely free and healed and whole again. And so that's what can happen. But the point is, it really is about paying attention to these parts. And woundeds, unfortunately, can make us feel so terrible sometimes that we don't want to turn towards them. We don't want to listen. We don't want to pay attention. We don't want to deal with them because we don't know what to do with that pain. And that's completely understandable, because, I mean, that's why people like me exist, and others, because that's what we do, is we help you process that pain. And that's what the drawing out process does, is permanently brings that exPower, in this case, the little wounded girl, out of her pain. Remember, I described exPowers, they're stuck in a chronic state of pain and anxiety and fear, etc. We bring them out of that and free them so that they can go back to being who they always were. So that's a whole other segue, another story. But that's an example of one wounded that was really just trying to get the woman's attention, my client's attention. When she finally got her attention, she was better. Ultimately, she was healed. And the other thing, though, there are woundeds who are trying to get your attention, but there are also woundeds who, frankly, aren't trying to do anything except protect themselves. And the reason why that is often because at some point or another, they learned there was no point. There was no point in trying to get their needs met. There was no point in trying to get noticed. There was no point in trying to be accepted. There was no point in expecting anyone else to help them feel safe. And so what have they done? They have usually these woundeds have just given up, and they've retreated away from the world. I've run into woundeds like this in clients who, for example, let's say both of their parents were alcoholics. And so they had to become adults as children, my client. They had to become adults as children to take care of their parents who were incapacitated and weren't meeting the child's needs. And so what happened was, unconsciously, that my client shoved that childlike part of them, totally unconsciously, this isn't conscious, but shoved that part of them in a corner and just left them there. And so on the one hand, it's tragic because, that client didn't have the parenting and the support and the love and the safety that they needed. But what's also kind of interesting about where woundeds do serve a kind of protective purpose is basically it's protected that inner child that clearly whose needs were not being met. And so that child was put in a dark corner, but at least it was protected from the world and from the abuse. And so in a way, there's this really interesting protective aspect of what woundeds will do and what we sometimes unconsciously do. And I've had clients who've come to me who said, they're like, oh, my inner child is dead. It's dead and gone. And I say, oh, okay. Sure enough, we do the drawing out process, and no, it's never dead. Your inner child is never dead. Your joy, your peace, all the wonderful things that child represents, creativity and abundance, that's just shoved somewhere in a dark corner where may not even be aware of it. So all it is just about bringing it back out of the darkness and back into light. So anyway, more stories, more segues. But the point is, that is often what these kinds of woundeds are trying to do. They can't get anyone's attention. So their only choice left, because they feel so helpless and hopeless and powerless, is to try to protect themselves. And the only way they know how to protect themselves is to get small, to crouch, to go into a dark corner, or what have you. So why should you heal your inner woundeds? As I always say, this may seem like kind of a ridiculous question. Well, of course, who wants to carry around inner woundeds? But I really think it's important to emphasize how woundeds and having exPowers in general really can make a mess of our lives without us even realizing it, and how much we unconsciously carry those wounds and struggle with them and react against them, or constantly sort of dealing with them on an unconscious level, and how that really does impact how we show up in the world. And, one of the things that I've often said is, for example, with change makers, a lot of change makers with whom I've worked, they get into wanting to make a difference in the world because they've been traumatized, because they've been hurt, because they've experienced something horrible, and they don't want other people to experience the same thing. And so they go into, starting an NGO, or, leading an organization, et cetera, et cetera. But often what can happen is can end up sabotaging them. So it's like the very thing that fueled them to a certain level of success or change making can actually end up sabotaging. When those wounds are not healed, they show up in different subconscious ways. And so that's why it's so important that we heal these exPowers in general, so that we can truly show up as we are. So back to the list. Why heal your inner woundeds? They are at the core of your inner issues. So I talked about defenders and controllers. They basically exist because of woundeds, because we have wounds, because we hurt. Controllers and defenders are trying to protect us because they've seen us hurt in some way or another. Woundeds are the parts of us that are carrying that hurt. They're carrying that pain. They're carrying that trauma. And so when we heal those woundeds, wow, like it's amazing what happens. It's amazing what happens when we heal any exPower. But when you heal that inner wounded that's really at the core, that's that part of you that's just carrying that pain, it's like all this energy just, and it's this amazing feeling. And my clients will often just go into this kind of blissed out state, because all this energy that was stuck in pain and fear, et cetera, is now suddenly free. And it's like, they can breathe in ways that they never could or hadn't been able to breathe in a long time. They carry pain from your past. As long as we've got woundeds inside of us, they're reminding us of that pain, whether consciously or unconsciously. And so we need to heal those so that we can move on from the past. And sometimes we can be scared of healing those wounds and healing that pain because we're afraid, and woundeds will tell me this. They're afraid, well, if I let go of this pain, then I'm going to get hurt again. Or then, my client is going to get hurt again. But actually, it's different. It's a counterintuitive thing, because actually while you're carrying the wounds, you're continually carrying that hurt and being rewounded and reminded of that pain. So it's actually a whole lot more empowering to heal it rather than to keep holding on to it. They make you feel unsafe in your own skin. I mean, this makes sense. If you're carrying a part of you that feels unsafe, then of course you're going to feel on some level unsafe inside yourself as well. And then finally, woundeds hold immense untapped inner power. This is really, it's so funny, because remember how I talked about that woundeds tend to think that they are powerless. They tend to believe that it's helpless, it's hopeless, and I can't change anything. I don't have any control. And they believe that because, yes, you've had experiences in your life, the ones that caused those to form, that made you feel that way. I mean, think about it. Like, the client whose parents are, both their parents were alcoholics. Could they control their parents' alcoholism? No, they couldn't. Their parents were the way they were, and they may still be that way. But as a child, that client realized, I can't really control, or at least a part of them, I should say, felt that way, because other parts might have formed, like controllers or defenders might have formed, to think that they could actually impact their parents' alcoholism. But the wounded is the part that says, I can't control this. I don't have any power over this, and holds on to that belief in its own powerlessness. And that's what's so interesting, though, because when you actually free a wounded, it opens up such incredible, delicious, joyous, creative, light-filled power. It's amazing when we heal a wounded, how so much of that pain just dissipates, and so much of that energy that was stuck in power stuck in struggle and pain, how much of that power that was stuck is now free and now can be used towards living your truth, knowing your truth, actualizing your truth. So woundeds have a lot of power. They may not think they do, but they have a hell of a lot. And so, as I've mentioned several times, the drawing out process is the technique I do. And I bring this up in every episode so far because I really want to make clear that just because you have these parts of you does not mean you are doomed to suffer from them. You aren't. That is why I developed the drawing out process. I developed it out of my own struggles, my own fears, and really working so hard to heal those parts of me. And I often say my mom's a psychotherapist, so I got a lot of free therapy, and I did a lot of modalities over the years. This for me has turned out to be extraordinary, and for my clients as well. I mean, so many of my clients say this is the most extraordinary thing they've ever done, and they can't believe how well it works, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, the drawing out process is the work that I do. It accesses your subconscious directly. It's not talk therapy. We're literally going to the horse's mouth of the exPower, if you will. And we accelerate, we clear those struggles, reveal your wisdom and your strengths, and accelerate your ability to achieve your optimum potential. So it really is about permanently healing these parts, even parts that you think will never ever heal. I'll just put it in my experience, I've been able to heal them. So this is what the drawing out process is about. So quick recap. We've just discussed your exPowers. In this last series, we did the 3 exPower types: defenders, controllers, woundeds. If you haven't seen the previous 2 episodes, please do watch, because it's about clearing out these exPowers. Here's the thing is, I mean, you can see right here that your truth is there on the right. Ultimately, this is what we're after. We all have a truth inside of us. You have your own truth, and I have my own truth. And when we are truly knowing and living and actualizing our truth, we are at our most at peace and our most powerful. And who doesn't want to feel at peace? And who doesn't want to feel empowered and powerful? This is about inner power. Inner peace is inner power. And so that's what the ChangeLight system is about. That is what I am all about, is accessing your truth so that you know it and you can fully embody it and live it. And when you do that, that's when you light up. Look at that. That's when you light up. But in order to get there fully, and it's not that we don't have glimmers of our truth ahead of time, but in order to get there fully, we have to deal with these other parts. You know, it's interesting. Someone once described like positive affirmations. So positive affirmations are wonderful. You know, I'm going to think positively, let's say, and they're fantastic. But in my experience, at the same time, in my experience, if all you're doing is trying to think positive and you're positively and you're ignoring the darkness inside of you, you're ignoring the pain, you're never really going to get there, because the pain is persistent and the pain will not be denied, and it will find some way to express itself. And that is what the exPowers, working with your exPowers, drawing out the exPowers, healing these exPowers, and as we're doing in this series, just simply understanding exPowers. That's what it's about. The 3 exPower types, understanding that. And mind you, it's not as though you only have 1 wounded and 1 controller and 1 defender. We've got all 3. I mean, we have multiples, I should say, of all 3. We have all 3 inside of us. I have drawn out so many wounded, so many defenders, so many controllers over the years. And so it's a matter of defragmenting. Look at this image right here with your exPowers. Notice that the fragmentation, that's all they are. They're just fragments of our light that, because of experiences that have caused us to feel unsafe in one way or another, they've kind of fragmented from the rest of our light and fallen into darkness. They've taken on fear and pain. So it's simply a matter of freeing them of that fear and pain. And what happens is they transform back into your exPowers. I call them exPowers. I'm going to explain all this in the next series, because we're going to talk about exPowers, and then I'm going to teach you the 3 types. But basically, exPowers are there to empower you to live your truth. Just like we have 3 types of exPowers, we have 3 types of exPowers. So I'll be really excited to share more about those with you, because then it's a process of healing those exPowers, honoring your empowers. And there's just immense, wonderful clarity in that alone. But then, of course, your guiding star. Your guiding star is that vision, as I explained before, of who you are here to be, doing what you came here to do, feeling how you feel or will feel when you are living your truth. And so your guiding star is this fabulous presence that you can tap into and learn how to work with. And that's what my work does. That's what the ChangeLight system is all about. That's what the course and the community teach you. So that's what that's about, is really tapping into your guiding star and having your guiding star guide you to ultimately know and live your truth. Your truth is the treasure we are after here. Your truth is inside you. It's like Dorothy's ruby slippers, you know, when Glenda says, "Oh, you had the opportunity or whatever, you know, to go home anytime. You just needed to click your heels 3 times, you know." But the point is, she always had that power. She just didn't recognize it. And so I'm here to teach you, you have that power. In fact, you have already inside of you all of the power you need to be who you are here to be. And so that's what this is about. That's what I'm about, and that's what my work ChangeLight system is about, is tapping into those powers that you may not have even realized were powers, and really bringing them back into alignment with your truth and living your truth and actualizing your truth. And I have a 4-step process for actualizing your truth. So with that said, I humbly, cordially, gratefully, enthusiastically invite you to join us in our brand new ChangeLight community. And inside the community is the ChangeLight course, where you can learn all of this. What I'm sharing with you in these series is like the tip of the iceberg. In fact, in these series, I'm not even teaching you how to do the techniques that can draw out these parts of you so that you can learn the truth about your exPowers and heal them. And you can tap into and access your empowers and have them guide you and draw out your guiding star and draw out your truth. And anytime we step into our truth, mind you, it can feel a little bit scary. And so that's why it's important to know, how do we do this? How, you know, what are the steps you can take to really make that process so much easier and more painless? So please do join us in the ChangeLight system. It's our safe, supportive community, and take the course. Just go to community.changelight.world. Simple enough. Well, thank you. I'm so grateful to have had this opportunity to speak with you. There we are. I'm so grateful to have had this opportunity to speak with you. And I hope that this series has been wonderful and you've been learning a lot. In the next series, I'm going to be talking about empowers and then the 3 types of empowers. So basically, in all of these first episodes of Inner Work for Greater Good, I'm teaching you the basics of the ChangeLight system, the basic elements, so that you can start to understand and start to recognize what's going on inside of you and start to empathize with these parts of you and have some compassion for what is going on inside of you. And also, as I said before, for you to know that it's okay. You are not alone. You are not crazy. Everyone has these parts inside of them. And it's just a matter of learning the truth about them and knowing how to draw them out. That's why it's called the drawing out process. You're drawing them out of you. You're also drawing them, putting them on the page. It's not about artistry. Stick figures are fine. So I don't want you to think this is an artistic process. It really isn't. It's about accessing directly from your subconscious, because that's the language in which your subconscious speaks, is images rather than words. So that's what it's about. So in any case, thank you so much for being here at this episode talking about woundeds. Next up, empowers. I look forward to seeing you the next time on Inner Work for Greater Good. Mwah! Love you.